Now, we learned from the Irish Times today that Irish troops are to provide weapons training to the Ukrainian armed forces. Paul Murphy is a People Before Profit TD. Paul, are you surprised by this?
I suppose I'm not very surprised. We opposed the participation of the Irish Defence Forces in this EU military training mission because precisely it is a full spectrum military training mission with a stated purpose of enhancing the capability of the Ukrainian army. But at the same time, the government reassured the public. The Taoiseach said on multiple occasions that the training to be provided would be non-lethal training. Repeatedly in the Dáil when we raised it, repeatedly in the media when we raised it, government representatives said this is all humanitarian, it's non-lethal. But now it's definitely the case that the Irish government, having lied to the public and misled the Dáil, actually has signed up for Irish troops engaged in training of Ukrainian soldiers in weapons and military tactics. And that is another extremely serious breach of what is left of our neutrality. It isn't really possible to continue to say that you are neutral if you are providing military training for one side in a military conflict. Even if we're right in saying that, the aggressor here is imperialist Russia, is Putin, it still is very clearly a breach of neutrality to then say we're going to provide military training to one side in this conflict.
Lisa Chambers is a Fianna Fáil senator. Lisa, is it still government's position that we're providing non-lethal training?
It is, and I want to completely disagree with what Paul has said, that it's a breach of our neutrality. It's not. We are a military neutral country in that we are non-aligned. We are not aligned to NATO, for example, and we are not aligned to a military organisation. That's what our military neutrality means. But we are not neutral when it comes to the war in Ukraine. We are absolutely full square behind Ukraine. We want them to win this. We want them to get their country back. And we don't want them to lose to Russia because they are a sovereign state and they've been illegally invaded. And the impact of the Ukrainian war on Ireland has been so significant. We have nearly 100,000 Ukrainian refugees here that have made Ireland their second home. The impact on our energy prices, food inflation, all impacted by the war. So yes, we absolutely want this war to end and we want Ukraine to have their country back. And in doing that, we have to acknowledge that Russia is far bigger. It is far superior in terms of its capabilities. Ukraine simply cannot defend itself on its own. And if Europe and the UK and the US don't assist in some way, they won't be able to protect themselves and defend their country. So, are we to sit back and not help these people or what is Paul suggesting? So I can go through, Kieran, if it's helpful, what we are providing. We are providing basic military training. And remember that many of these, what we call soldiers, are ordinary civilians, people like you and I that were never soldiers and never intended to be soldiers.
Are we providing weapons training?
Fighting. We will be providing drill instructor training, which can lead to weapons training.
So how do you define that? Forget the debate about neutrality, but how do you define that as being non-lethal?
Well, what we're doing is allowing people to defend themselves. Bearing in mind, Kieran, many of these people are not soldiers. That's not their profession. It's not what they signed up to do, but they're trying to defend their country. And
but you're not teaching them rhetoric. Like, you're teaching them to defend themselves violently. And again, listen, there's been lots of people who think that's what we should be doing. We can go down that road in just a moment. But the idea that that's non-lethal training, that's a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
What we're doing is providing basic military training, leadership training, drill instructor training, training on how to remove explosives and IEDs, medical training and engineering training. That is the list of training that we're currently providing. We are not providing any weapons to Ukraine. We are not entering Ukrainian territory. And we are trying to assist people who have no military training whatsoever, ordinary civilians, to basically protect themselves as best they can. Nobody wants this war. Nobody supports this war. But we are where we are, as the saying goes. And if we don't help these people in some way, and what we're doing is quite limited in terms of, other countries are doing different things within their own political system. What we are doing is providing training and assistance, but very much at arm's length. And to suggest that we are in breach of our military neutral position is simply factually not correct.
Okay, but the instruction we would provide in basic weapons skills, that's non-lethal.
In my view, you're not going in terms of actually, you're not fighting the war for them. You're not entering their territory. But if you take an ordinary civilian and expect them
I
to defend
appreciate the
themselves
training is non-lethal, but in the sense that we're not actively involved. But we were told that the training itself would be in non-lethal areas. How is weapons training a non-lethal area?
Well, in terms of drill instructor and weapons handling, it's simply allowing people to protect themselves and not harm themselves while they're doing whatever they can to try and defend their territory. But to suggest we're breaching neutrality, we're not. And I mean, I would put it back to Paul. What are you suggesting we should do? Should we just completely sit back and not help these people? Because that seems to be
they don't. Okay, go on, Paul.
How do we help?
Let me answer. I'm going to answer the question, and then I'm going to pose questions back to you, Lisa, if that's okay. So what I think we should be doing, and we proposed in the Dáil, but the government has opposed, we should be calling for debt cancellation for Ukraine. Huge amount of money is still flooding out of Ukraine to pay debts for the debts built up by various oligarchs, which is going to cut across the reconstruction of the country. Secondly, I think we should be increasing the amount of humanitarian aid we're giving to Ukraine. And thirdly, I think we should shut down the IFSC being used as a conduit, shadow banking sector for oligarchs from Russia and elsewhere, which continue to fuel the war. And I don't understand why the government hasn't done those things. So in other words, I think we should do things to assist the ordinary Ukrainian people without using the war to abandon neutrality. And then secondly,
we're not using the war to abandon neutrality. That's a ridiculous statement.
You had a good run there, and what you said in your run was calling for basically an end to neutrality. And let's have that debate. But let's stop dancing. I didn't call for an end to neutrality. And I never said that. But what you're in favour of, you're in favour of the Irish government and Irish soldiers providing military training to Ukrainian soldiers. Okay, fine. But then don't hide that position. Don't pretend that that's just non-lethal training. It is not non-lethal training. We're training people to use weapons to kill other people, right? So then let's have that debate.
Paul, and nobody's hiding behind anything. I've been very clear in the position.
You're absolutely hiding behind it.
And
hold on, Lisa, hold on. Let Paul. Let Paul finish his point, and then you can absolutely respond.
Okay. Micheál Martin lied to the public. He misled the Dáil repeatedly, and he lied to the public when he said you're engaged in non-lethal training. You want to be involved more and more in this war, but the public cannot trust you, and this is another example of why they can't. Look at this war. Right, the front lines of the war are basically the same as they have been for almost a year, since November 2022. The death toll is heading towards 500,000 people. More and more weapons are being flooded into Ukraine, but the front lines are not changing. So is Ireland just going to go along with the agenda of NATO here, who have their own agenda, which is not about the liberation of the Ukrainian people? It's their own geopolitical agenda here. Or should we not be using our neutral position, defending that neutral position, calling for Russian withdrawal, and being a voice for peace on the international stage?
Lisa, your response.
Well, look, I mean, that all sounds lovely, that we'd call for peace and that we'd ask Russia to withdraw. And I mean, if I thought that would work, certainly we would support that. We would love Russia to withdraw in the morning. I think it's quite unlikely, Paul, and that's commentators right across the globe would be in agreement with that. So to go back to the three areas where Paul has suggested Ireland should help, that we should advocate for debt cancellation, humanitarian aid, and that we would abandon the use of the IFSC for the funneling of oligarchs' money. All of those things are on the table, but that's just money, Paul. So you want to just throw money at it.
Why haven't you done them?
Again, can I respond to the issues you've raised, or is it just yourself?
Why didn't you do them?
I know, Paul. I interrupted Lisa to let you respond. So, Lisa,
thank you. So it seems to be the position. It seems to be the position of People Before Profit and Paul Murphy that we just simply fire money from the sidelines and stand back as though we are observers, because that's just an easy position to adopt. What we are doing, and I make no apology for it, we have a sovereign state where people are fighting for the future of their country, the very existence of their country. It is in Europe. They may not be in the European Union, but they are on the way to becoming members of the European Union. We are helping them to defend their territory, and I do think there is support for that. We are not providing weapons. We are not entering Ukrainian territory. And to sit back and say we'll just throw money at it and stand on the sidelines and be independent of all of this. Everybody is involved in this war, Paul, because we're all impacted by it. And what we are trying to do to protect Ukraine as best we can and assist them is at least help them to defend themselves, because many of these, as I said, Kieran, they're not soldiers, they're ordinary men and women that never intended to be on the front line anywhere, but that's where they find themselves with no skills, no training, and in that position they are very, very vulnerable, and they are up against a country much bigger, much larger, with a much greater capability. They cannot win on their own. That's the fact of it. So, I mean, it's a very luxurious position to sit back and say, oh, not our business, and we won't get involved. We're very fortunate that we're not stuck in the middle of it. But I do think we have to help people as best we can. And as I said, it is basic military training. It is training in removing explosives and combat medical training and engineering. These are areas where we have very good, highly skilled Defence Force personnel here in our Defence Forces, and they are helping people to build those skills to protect themselves.
Paul, debt cancellation provides very little solace for Russian soldiers kicking in your front door. So why not do this?
Absolutely.
The moral imperative is to do this, is the argument.
But that's an argument for us to send, weapons to Ukraine, right? That's what that is an argument for. And some people want to make that argument. And okay, let's have that debate. I think it's important that we defend neutrality in this context, because I think there is an agenda driven by the government and by the armaments corporations who are making huge profits out of this war at the moment. You can go and check their share prices and their recorded profits, right? And it's an agenda of militarization. And I think it's important that Ireland resists that, so expresses our solidarity with the people of Ukraine, makes a real difference, which, let's be honest, if Ireland was to be a voice for debt cancellation, if Ireland was to increase humanitarian aid, if Ireland was to shut the flow of money to Russian oligarchs and other oligarchs through the IFSC, that would be far more meaningful than 30 soldiers participating in some training exercises. Well, let's be real. But it would touch on the interests of those that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael represent.
Let's be real about it. We have massive sanctions levelled by the European Union against Russia. So we are hitting them in their pocket, and we have been doing that since the beginning of this war, and it hasn't brought the war to an end. So when you say express solidarity, platitudes are lovely, and it's a lovely position to be in, to express solidarity, but that's not real action.
Okay,
we have seen the biggest weapons transfer of weapons in history has taken place here, and the battle lines have not shifted from November 2022. Almost 500,000 people have now been killed. So the idea that throwing more weapons into this and Ireland becoming a voice for increased militarization is going to help. It hasn't helped until now.
Lisa, let him. You can come back in a moment. Let Paul finish his point.
We've been pursuing this strategy, and it hasn't been a success. And what has been happening in reality, right, is that I don't believe that the armaments corporations, I don't believe that the US has the interests of ordinary Ukrainian people in their mind. That's not why they're doing this. This is part of a broader conflict that they have with Russia and China, and it's in their interest to kind of bog Russia down, weaken Russia as much as possible, drag this thing out. And I don't think that Ireland should be aligning with that. We should be aligning with ordinary Ukrainian people.
And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing.
Go on.
And if I can respond, Kieran, to the point about
EU militarization, not participation in NATO.
Respond to the point raised.
You made the NATO point. Go on. I started with Paul. I'll finish with Lisa.
So, Paul, you made the point that we shouldn't be pursuing this strategy. The only strategy the Irish government are pursuing is to support the Ukrainian people in their decision as a sovereign nation to defend their territory, and we absolutely support that. And we are not throwing weapons at anything, because we're not sending any weapons. And just to put into context, the maximum number of Defence Forces personnel at any one time out of the state is up to 30 people. That is it. So it's a very basic military training, as I said, to ordinary people that were never intended to be soldiers, but that's where they find themselves. So I think a lot of the points Paul is making are simply not factually correct in terms of where we're at.
Senator Lisa Chambers, Paul Murphy, People Before Profit TD, thank you both very much for joining us. We're not neutral, says one listener, but we have every right to train any country to defend itself from an aggressor, or rather we are neutral, is how that text starts. John says, let's end the hypocrisy. Yes, at the behest of the church, we were quite neutral during World War II. Let's take our place amongst the right-thinking countries of the world against tyranny and end this facade of neutrality. Another listener says neutrality is not enshrined in our constitution. And one more for the moment, but people seem to have strong views on this. I would be gobsmacked if Irish troops have a whole lot to teach Ukrainian soldiers in either their tactics or arms.